Доброе утро, уважаемые коллеги. Мы начинаем нашу сессию. Я приглашаю сюда на сцену двух наших уважаемых.
Good morning, colleagues. I invite here to this panel our two esteemed speakers, Tatiana Golikova, who is Deputy Head of the Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, and Tatiana Mikhailovna Maleva, the Director of the Institute of Social Analysis and forecast of the RANEPA, and we have here our experts, Maxim Topilin, the Minister of Labor and Social Assistance of the Russian Federation, Alexander Shokhin, President of the Russian Alliance of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs, Maxim Reshetnikov, the Governor of the Perm Krai, Andrei Klitschkov, the Governor of the Orel Oblast, and Alexei Tsedenov, the Head of the Republic of Buryatia. So let us start with our subjects, which are known to you and which you all know, at least at the basic level: demography, employment, taxes. The government has made quite a lot in order to increase the birth rate and to decrease the death rate, to bring down the poverty levels. Unfortunately, in the latest 2 or 3 years, things have become somewhat worse. We have had some setbacks, mild setbacks in the field of income and birth rate and other aspects of social policy. And order 2004 by the President has been adopted to improve the situation. Now we give the floor to Ms. Golikova, who will explain the reasons for this setback and who will say what should be done to improve these things. Good morning, colleagues. Now we'll speak about the social triad, and this subject is key to achieve the objectives set by the President. Let me remind you of some individual goals that we are to attain, bringing up the total fertility rate to 1.7 and to decrease the number of deaths from accidents at labor to 350 for 100,000, cancer deaths to 180 for 1,000, and the infant mortality to 4.5 for 1,000 new births. And we also want to increase employment by 5 in our economy by 5% a year, and to include the share of people employed by medium-scale and small-scale enterprises up to 20%. To achieve our first goals, we need to achieve our 2 national goals before 2024 to increase a stable increase of the Russian Federation and to increase the life expectancy in the Russian Federation to 76 in 2024 and 80 years by 2030. And all other objectives are connected with other national goals, which we are not going to discuss, but nonetheless, I'll have to say that decreasing the level of poverty by 50% in the Russian Federation and increasing incomes of the population is closely connected with the objective of putting the Russian Federation within the top 5 economies of the world, and to overstep the 4% level of inflation. when we speak that we need to decrease the poverty by 50%, we'll have to take into account the indices which are necessary to achieve the other national goal, which I have mentioned. It is not fortuitous that within the 15 key indices that will be used to assess the regions of the Russian Federation, 6 are connected with this social triad which we are discussing. Triad which we are discussing with you, increasing level of social enterprise, labor productivity, reducing poverty, and increasing life expectancy and population growth rate. So what do we have in the way of indices in the triad which we are discussing? In the 11 months of 2018, unfortunately, there were more deaths than births than 193,000, 1.5 per 1,000 of population. And the index of birth rate has gone down by 5.2%. Death rate was 12.5 per 1,000, like in December 2017. The highest decrease of the population, more than 7 per 1,000, is in the Smolensk, Tambov, Sverdlov, Tula, and Tver oblasts. And high natural birth rate is found traditionally in the Northern Caucasus, in the Republic of Sakha, Yakutia, Tuva, and Tyumen Oblast, and Khanty and Mansi district. We have the infant rate, mortality rate is 5. During the 11 months of this year, the level of employment is 4.8%, and the number of people employed by the economies increased by 400,000, and now is 72.6 million, and the number of the unemployed has decreased accordingly. The lowest level of unemployment is in the Central Federal District, 2.7%, and traditionally the highest is in the Northern Caucasus district. If in 2013-2014 the level of poverty was a little more than 13%, in the latest several years, we have seen a small decrease of poverty over the 11 months of 2017. The level of poverty has decreased by 0.5% as compared to the similar period of the previous year. A few words on the approaches which we are thinking to adopt in order to improve the situation. Some of these measures have already been named in the main directions of activities of the government, and certain measures have yet to be assessed and worked on additionally. But before talking about this, I would like to call your attention to the following. The classical system of social assistance, which is in action in the Russian Federation, which is based on the method of obligatory social insurance, and which has proved efficient in the developed industrial society, we could say that all the three elements of our triad, employment, demography, and social assistance, are interdependent, and the optimal demographic dependence level would be good for a good employment level, and that would ensure a normal level in the of income. But in view of the demographic situation which existed in the 1940s through 1990s and the new trends in societal development, things have been changing. Here at the forum, we are suggested to choose between pronatalism, encouraging birth rates, and reducing the death rate. But ideally, we do not need to choose between these two approaches, but to combine them in the most useful way possible. And we are trying to do exactly that. The countries which are well developed now in the way of the economy have now two very low birth rates, I can give you the examples of Japan, Italy, or Germany. In rich countries, encouraging birth rate does not make too much sense because this does not give good economic results, because most of such benefits are received by migrants, and so the economically developed countries put the stress on decreasing death rate. And their experience is not very good for us, because many of such countries are too different from us. These are densely populated small countries like in Europe, which have a very different situation like us. And there are other countries like China, which have a very big territory and very big population, which go from one extreme to the other. First, they discourage birth rate very strictly, and then they begin to encourage it. In Russia, we have a very low population density, so we need to increase the number of the population. And we need to increase mostly the numbers of indigenous peoples of the Russian Federation, including both Russians and other peoples who have lived in Russia for a very long time. And it would be perhaps not quite possible to do it just by encouraging birth rate. And so a number of measures which we are to take are aimed at increasing the life expectancy of those who have already been born. We have already passed one stage or in decreasing the death rate when we have implemented our first public health modernization project. It has given a very good effect. The death rate of the working age population has decreased by 34%, and about 216,000 human lives have been saved. The new public health development project must not only save the results that have been achieved, but to achieve new results. In order to have natural increase of the population, we need to save another 162,000 human lives, and those are the lives of people of the working age. And we hope that the natural decrease of the population will be stopped in 2023-24. It is for the first time that we increase measures to increase health situation at work, and not just prevention of accidents, but also prevention of so-called traditional diseases, which often lead to people becoming unable to work. Every year, 27 million cases of temporary inability to work are registered in the country, and if we decrease such cases, we will preserve our labor resources and to change the structure of labor of working people, making them younger. uh, uh, we had about 47% of the people of working age younger than 25 years. And now we have 43% of working people from 25 to 40 years. Of course, the demographic processes that we had in the 1990s will affect the age structure because the birth rate by the year 2000 had decreased by 35% as compared to 1990, and they were replaced by people of older ages. Therefore, a priority is to improve working conditions, to create jobs, take into account the new age structure, and to increase the employment. In this changing age structure, there will be more specialists who have a lot of experience, which on the one hand should lead to increase of productivity, but also to a shortage of working people, of working age people, where younger ages are necessary. Some problems can be resolved, can be changed by migration, internal and external. 75 million people, that is about half of the population of Russia, live in 73 agglomerations. And the rest of the country is not very much populated and does not contribute much to the development of the economy. So we need to increase the mobility of the population, and therefore the employers must be ready to create conditions which would encourage people to move to other regions. So an employer must at first give more to an employee than he can get from him. Such mechanisms of encouragement have been developed in many countries where internal migration of workforce has become greater than external migration. Late last year, the population has increased, has introduced some changes into programs of increasing mobility, which has provided for better encouragement of mobility. For example, the employers of the Far East could get about 225,000 rubles of support for a work outside, which comes from the outside of the region. Now it is about 1 million. And about 90% of support provided by the government is spent on the Far East. In order to improve the demographic situation in the Far East district, special measures are like additional mother's capital, greater subsidies for the birth of children, the decrease to the 5% of the rate of mortgage for families who are about to have a second and further children. Measures which help people, which introduce easy conditions to buy housing in rural areas. I'm talking about those measures which have already been approved and which in January and February will become normative documents and so the regions of the Far Eastern districts will have to take their own decisions. In view of the demographic trends and the development of life expectancy, one of the priority is to create jobs for people who are nearing the pension age. And for this purpose, the government, within the framework of the national demography projects, has planned professional training for people of all the ages. For this purpose, a program was adopted on the 30th of December 2018 for training, professional training of people who are nearing the pension age. It is planned that in the coming years, at least 75,000 people who are nearing their pension age will benefit from such programs, of vocational training. And the human capital, the setting up of a greater pool of persons of advanced age will provide for new opportunities for the development of small-scale and medium-scale enterprises. Here we need both federal and local and regional authorities to help developing such mechanisms as family businesses and at-home businesses. This is something new for us. We are just starting to discuss this because now there are some changes in being introduced into the social insurance, including old age pensions. As for the employment that I have just mentioned, we are now planning within the framework of the demography project to organize about 50,000 groups for looking after children as an alternative to kindergartens. But the labor market with such forms of employment is limited. Out of 1.6 million vacancies that we have, there are only a few thousand vacancies for family business or at-home businesses like putting up notice, etc. And most of such jobs are like a designer's job or something like that, are based on a full employment system. And here we need to introduce certain structural changes in order to provide jobs for people who are nearing their pension age. And to develop this subject, I would like to say that since the 1990s, the economic role of the family has increased. The family has become an important decision maker as to where its members will work. Nowadays, the fact that women have to work on a full-time basis makes it difficult for women to have children at a young age. In Moscow, a survey has been made among women from 20 to 45 years of age, and 80% of women who have children have said that they wanted to combine motherhood and work. And in this connection, I would like to call your attention to the necessity of developing such new forms of employment. A number of professions, like professions connected with processing a lot of digital data, may become at-home based.
На их материальное положение и рынок труда. В этом отношении в рамках национального проекта «Демография» женщин в период отпуска по уходу за ребенком также будут предоставлены дополнительные возможности переобучения и повышения квалификации. Предполагается, что в период с 20 по 24 год ежегодно такую переквалификацию будет проходить от 40 до 50 тысяч человек. Должны измениться подходы и к оплате труда. Высока потребность в переходе на способы оплаты, зависящие или от конечного...
And actually, it may depend on the final result of the payment, where we have to work on that additionally. Let me draw your attention to the Russian statistics data. The poverty rate in Russia is related to the education level. So the risk of poverty, 1.59, is attributable to the people with the lowest education, and the people with a higher education has the risk of unemployment of about 0.59. Why I'm drawing your attention to these very factors? Because in compliance with the order signed by the President, we have to speed up the technological development in Russia to increase the number of companies which are working in the area of technological innovations. Therefore, we will see the gap in the incomes of people related to different education. At the same time, such differences in jobs may result in the high and tougher competition among the workers with a higher education or vocational education. Let me draw attention to the fact that a material role is played by the domestic labor migration. In a brief period of time, we'll have to revisit the assessment of poverty and to measure that using more state-of-the-art standards. We're using the absolute standard, poverty, as actually related to the living standards or subsistence minimum. Subsistence minimum was introduced in 1992 as a temporary solution for the period of economic stabilization. In order not to make any revolutions in that area, not to change dramatically the approach, which would jeopardize the implementation of the decree by the President, we have to raise the bar of the standards. The Ministry of Labor, together with the social partners, the Parliament, has set up an ad hoc working group to revisit those approaches, and we expected that the results would be obtained in 2020. Another aspect I would like to draw attention to is the following. All types of the public assistance is applied for by only 17% of the population, so only 4 million out of 20 million who are considered to be low-paid or indigenous people applied for such an assistance. So it means that social support is obtained by wrong people on the one hand, but on the other hand, probably the services which are providing the information about social services are not accessible. In that sense, the Ministry of Labor, together with the pension fund, are developing and are upgrading the system of communication to provide necessary information about the social payouts. Moreover, the plan which we have adopted for ourselves, the plan of measures to reduce the poverty level, in 2020 and 2021, 8 regions of Russia, Tatarstan, Kabardino-Balkaria, Primorye, Ivanov, Lipetsk, Nizhegorodsky, Tomsk regions will host a pilot project within which we will do a multifaceted analysis of the poverty and will develop the measures to improve the regional systems of assistance and support to most vulnerable people, bearing in mind the criteria of indigenous population. So you know that such a criteria was developed, but after the social support was abolished, the local authorities paid no attention to these assistance. According to the Labor Ministry assessment, only 7 to 8% of most vulnerable people are embraced by such a system. So this type of assistance is not communicated to the people, is not widespread, and the families are not ready to commit themselves to anything, including getting extra education or being educated or further employed. But despite those challenges, we're going to retain these solutions and provide necessary funds. So, I mean that will maintain the pay rate for the school teachers, university teachers, medical workers. We will adjust the inflation rate, other payouts. We will adjust to the inflation rate, other social payouts in compliance with the actual inflation rate. But at the same time, we bear in mind that we'll have to take other measures in order to improve the incomes of the people and to improve the demographic situation in Russia and to improve and raise the employment rate. The resolution for the Far East, which has not been yet adopted, along with the measures applicable to the Far East, we took extra measures to facilitate the mortgage rates. We extended the period for the zero-interest mortgage, or actually the zero interest rate would be provided for the whole duration of the loan. And you know that one-off compensation to the creditors was increased to 10% of the mortgage loan, but no more than 450,000 rubles provided family delivers the second or the third child. So the topic which I have highlighted is very sophisticated and very complicated. From what I've already told, you cannot get the full list of areas we're going to work in, and we were going to take necessary decisions, discussing that with expert society and the civil society. That's why we rely on you for further cooperation and work. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we still have some room for a Q&A, but probably we'll move that to the end of the discussion, provided we have free time for that. So in order to make room for all the speakers. Tatiana, the floor is yours. Did the government put the right accents or anything else we have to do, but the government fails to do that? Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. I'd like to say that this is quite clear, that in all the discussions which are dedicated to the social problems, the topic of social development is prevailing now, as it is the one which is indicated in the decree by the President. From what Ms. Golikova, Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian government, said, I would like to pick up a very important topic, which is as follows. The success of the upcoming 5-year-long period of time, this is not a 6-year term, of Mr. Putin would depend not only on attaining some quantity indicators which were highlighted in the presidential decree, but it would also depend on to what extent the country manages to develop necessary institutes and tools to set up a solid foundation, helping us to address those problems in the upcoming 5 years and after this 5-year period is over. The problem which we are discussing and which have been put forward to us and which were described in every detail by Ms. Golikova, this is about the disproportionate demographic development, problems with employment, poverty, rise, etc. These questions, this is not something accidental. These are not the problems which popped up all of a sudden in a very short period of time, but following that 5-year period will not be complacent because these problems will rise again and again. In that sense, setting up efficient tools and institutes to address those problems would actually depend as equally important result as the quantity figures. What makes me think so? This is our own social history. We have already passed 3 stages of our social history. The first stage, in essence, on the way of sustainable economic growth, we have 2 types of barriers. First of all, shortage of resources. This is what everyone knows and everyone speaks about, but the second shortage is the shortage of institutes. This is what is regularly omitted from the discussion. So in 1990s, when they said that the social agenda was on the sidelines of the social and political agenda. And this period of time can be called no money and no institutions. The first half of the naught years, when the economic growth started, we, the state, unfortunately failed to channel necessary financial resources to the social sphere in order to offset, to compensate for the dramatic fall or slump which was witnessed in the 1990s. If we remember this period of time, this stage, we will see that major institutional reforms of the social sphere took place, namely the pension reform, the new labor legislation, the reform of the education, the reform of social benefits, and some other reforms. And these were these reforms which changed the rules of the game and didn't require much of the funding. And this is for 2 decades that we are building our social policy proceeding from those founding reforms. In the second part of the naught years, when the government felt some sustainability and stability, when the economic growth acquired a sustainable nature, in that very period of time, we saw a turn, an increase in the funding of the social sphere. By the way, in that context, I would like to respond to my invisible opponents. Very often we're told that the social sphere is funded too extensively in the recent years. But these financial indicators, these funding volumes are on such a rise because they didn't grow for quite a while. Only in the second half of the naught years, we managed to compensate for some inner debt, some arrears. This was about facilitating the birth rate for national projects, most of which were of social nature. This is about valorization of the pension rights and equalizing the pension to the subsistence minimum. This is the measure which allowed us to alleviate the poverty of the elderly. This stage can be called money and moderate development of the institutions. At the moment, we are embarking on a new stage, and it depends on us. We have to make a choice. Either we reiterate the rationale of the previous period and focus more on getting some extra funding for the social sphere, or we use a different rationale, meaning that we have money and good institutions. Let me highlight the most important institutions without which we cannot do. I, as an expert for the social sphere, see that clearly that the most ambitious goal, which is put forward before the country and before the government and before the experts, before everyone, so the most ambitious goal is to cut in half the poverty level, which would necessitate and require allocating major financial resources. Ms. Golikova mentioned this topic already. Addressing this goal should start not with determining necessary funding volume, but it should start with a question: what can be defined as poverty? It is not by accident that this is the question which now is being discussed by the media, by the experts. Measurement of any object, of any item, such as poverty, for instance, and finding necessary definition, this is something which will determine all our further actions. Just like in many other countries of the world, we define poverty falling from the absolute concept of poverty, when the income of a physical person or a household is compared to the national poverty line. In Russia, this is the subsistence minimum. I will not tell you that we have a huge experience of alleviating poverty, and our moderator, Mr. Fomichev, said that we managed to adapt for the poverty. I do think that this is a kind of a story that you may read from a report which our institute has prepared, or it is also published on our website. Over the last 9 months, poverty accounts for 13.3%, so this is above the minimum which we managed to reach. But this is not the most important thing. This is not the most alarming thing. I'm more alarmed and concerned not by the scale of the poverty, by its structure. We know its structure, so the biggest risks of poverty are attributable to children under 16, and their poverty level is 2 times more than the poverty level among other people. So 60% of the poor people are the big families. So actually there is another problem of working poor people, and this problem actually has something to do with the poverty of the big families. So there are some cross-sections between them, something in common between those two problems. And when we measure the poverty, there are other issues there too, where we see the gap. So there are alternative methods to measure poverty. These are the methods using the so-called deprivations. When the population confirms that it cannot bear these or those costs, or there is a subjective poverty which exceeds dramatically the absolute poverty level, and it is more than 20%, about 22 or 25%. And the subjective poverty actually is subject to some biased opinions. It is not by accident that it is called as subjective, but we have to ask a question, for instance. If we decrease the poverty level as measured by the absolute standards, absolute criterion, and what if the subjective poverty doesn't change, or, God forbid, it grows? Will we, in that case, implement the presidential decree? This is a rhetorical question. Why these methods of measuring poverty have to be specified? If we fail to do that, we will fail to define the weakest points of Russia's poverty. So there is a conflict between the monetary and non-monetary measurements. And there is a textbook example. So 2 poles, the elderly and young children. So these are the 2 poles, the 2 social strata, which bear the biggest risks of poverty. Really, the biggest monetary poverty measured in money-wise, that's the poverty among children, among families with children, 22% and 7%, so this is very much below. This is the poverty among the elderly. If we look at the indicators and figures of subjective deprivations, we will see a different picture. So there are less poor among children and families with children than among the elderly. So how we can narrow this gap, bridge this gap? So we build our social policy the following way. We see the following configuration cropping up. So the families with their children are supported by different social institutions. First and foremost, this is everything related to child delivery, to the preschooling, schooling, extracurricular education, and the absolute poverty indicators do not affect those factors. And sometimes we may see a configuration that in such a demographic system we see shortage of money, but they have no shortage of institutions, meaning that we have a lot of social institutions to help children. As for the elderly, the situation is totally different. We are improving funding for the pensioners and retired people, so the monetary means are prevailing there. The market of social services for the elderly, such as healthcare, medical treatment, and medications, this is something we have to focus on. The institution, I have to go in more details. This is the implementation of the principle of targetedness. We're providing necessary services only for those who need it. And experts very often have to address their reproach that why are you speaking about for instance, targeting. Why are you talking about targeting, despite the fact that we are moving towards targeting, but only 7% out of the total volume of funds for the social benefits are proceeding from the targeted programs. At the moment, we run into the situation when we have the so-called inclusion and exclusion mistakes. Look, among the households which are entitled to the child benefits, only 36 of them are poor until the moment the child comes of age. And so this is the inclusion problem. And 35% of the households didn't get necessary benefits. So this is the exclusion problem, or the exclusion error or mistake. Until we introduced the benefits for the first child, still the benefit which was paid to the most vulnerable indigenous families usually amounted to 400 rubles. So this is not a very material amount of money. Really, the regions have to now move towards targeting at a more rapid pace. But I would like to say that I do believe that the main objective of the federal center is to help the regions in their methodological and informational support in order to have reliable tools to measure the need and to measure the poverty. We have to set up a kind of informational platform, and this information platform will facilitate very much the improvement of the situation. So I'm not calling for setting up a new database, but these databases have to be pinpointed by a new foundation, by a new platform. What I mean is we have GISO big data. We have big data related to the federal tax authorities. So there are territorial social protection authorities, and all these things taken together and which would rest on the same platform would improve the digitalization of all the processes. And afterwards, we will be able to make another step forward to get out of the absolute benefits and introduce the benefits depending on the shortage of income or deficit of income. Following the current methodology, we cannot define what financial means is necessary to this or that household in order to attain the subsistence minimum. Once we use big data and digital methods, we will know this figure and will save up the funds which are needed in order to attain this goal. Finishing my presentation, let me tell you the following. Really, the demographic situation is quite complicated, it's very dire. We're using a lot of methods to improve it and to resolve this issue, but not the demographic focus or exact demographic figures that are important for the social sphere. But we should pay more attention to the load which is being put on the shoulders of the working age people. the more successful the country is in terms of improving the birth rate and improving the lifespan, the more acute this contradiction would be. And whatever we do to improve the welfare system and social system, we have to bear in mind that the well-being of the population would depend on the economic growth and the growth of labor productivity. That's why our TRIAD will be successful only if this TRIAD sounds like that. Improving demographic situation, productive employment, and increasing incomes. That's it. Thank you so much, Tatiana. So let us proceed with our esteemed experts. Saying that, I'm passing the floor to, let's start with the governors, who usually would bear the main burden of the implementation of the policy highlighted by the federal authorities. My question goes to Alexei Tsidenov, head of Buryatia Republic. Buryatia Republic is not the most affluent region, so that's why the poverty issues, I would dare suggest, is quite a priority for you, probably top priority for you. Ms. Maleva spoke about targeting and needs factors, and usually when addressing those factors, the main burden would be put on the shoulders of the regions. This can be done in compliance with the local legislation, using their own criteria. So what we now have in the legislation, is it enough to let the regions alleviate the poverty efficiently? Should the federal authorities, using their mandate and their own tools, use other methods for targeting needs? And what else can be done in order to bridge this gap and to improve the incomes of the people? Exemplified by your republic. And after two speakers, I will be tougher as the moderator, so everyone should have no more than 5 to 7 minutes.
Thank you, esteemed colleagues and panel members. Ms. Maleva has spoken in detail about those mechanisms and measures that exist in this field, the methods. I'm not talking about the amount of money, but about the methods and mechanisms. Means testing is a difficult thing to do. It takes into account not only needs, but also their registration. And, for example, Buryatia has a lot of forests, and we have tried to check how many people work in wood cutting and processing, and per one legal entity we had just one person. So of course it was a fiction. So we started working in the field of legalization of employment, and it has changed very much the whole picture. So it is very important to check the original data, to check if they are correct. And we have subsidies for communal payments, and if more than 22% of a family income is spent on it, then the rest is paid by the government of the Republic. And of course, here we need to fine-tune this assistance, and for this we need to check the real picture, the real incomes, in order to do more correct means testing. Let me say a few words about what's been done and what is not being done in the Republic. The triad of demography, employment, and income. You know, this triad can be read both ways. We can start with demography. If we have more human resources, then we have more employment opportunities and more incomes. But at the same time, if a family's income increase, this affects demography. So what is more important, demography affecting income or income affecting demography? Today, it is the income that affects demography than the other way around. But in fact, paradoxically, more children are born in rural areas where the revenues are lower. The difference is a way of life difference, because in a town, if you have just 2 rooms, you cannot have 2 children of different sexes. And in rural areas, people even having small houses have a lot of opportunity to spend time outside of the home. And now we have taken the decision to give a free flat to families that have 6 and more children. And when we started this work, we had only 20 such families, and now we have 550 such families. So you see how the measure works. So the government supports the units of federation which are in the Far Eastern district, and we are now part of this district, and we are very glad to have to benefit from such federal measures to increase our fertility. Our total fertility rate is 2.04, and thanks to that, we did not enjoy a lot of measures to support fertility. But now, as part of the Far Eastern district, we are enjoying them. Talking about the rural areas, the increase of quality of life in rural areas affect the population situation and the birth rate much more than similar measures taken in cities. So all such measures affect the population situation directly, and and a very important thing is to take into account if only one of the parents works or 2 parents work. If there is a nursery, a kindergarten, then it is easier for both parents to go out to work, and this helps them to have more children. So the availability of kindergartens, nurseries, and things like that helps to stimulate the birth rate. And I am sure that the measures which are stipulated by the presidential order will positively affect our population situation. Thank you very much, Mr. Tsedenov. I would like to ask Mr. Klitschkov, you will hardly be able to become part of the Far Eastern administrative district. You are closer to Moscow. But on the other hand, the Kaluga Oblast is one of our central regions which has certain demographic problems. And the Oryol Oblast is one of those regions where you have the demography problem, the natural decrease of the population. And what can you do at the level of your region? Do you have enough instruments to do this? What do you have, and what do you need in order to change the situation? What more should be done? Okay, thank you. I totally agree with Mr. Tsedenov, but before answering your question, I would agree with him that the elements of the TRIAD are very closely connected. And of course, we can look at them separately, but it's less productive. And it's sometimes difficult to see what comes first, the demography or the population situation or the revenues. So I think that here statistics might help us to take the correct measures to improve the situation both in the population dynamics, revenues, and employment. Ms. Maleva spoke about labor migration. For us, it is a big problem because regions often are unable to resolve the situation of the available resources. And within the framework of solving this problem, it is important to mention that today education and public health needs labor resources. We are closer to Moscow. We are close to Moscow, and other regions are closer to other regional centers, and this creates certain difficulties. And nowadays, we should understand that demographics affect economics and affect the economy. Our region has certain characteristics. In 2018, we have an increase of the total fertility rate by 1.1%. Now it is 9.6 per 1,000, but nonetheless, the number of working age population at the beginning of the year 2018 has decreased by 13%, and at the same time, the share of the older working age population has increased, and due to the existing factors, these trends will continue. By the end of the year, the number of working age population will decrease by 2%, and by existing assessments, the level of registered unemployment will be about 1%. So there will be one vacancy per one person. So we see, I'm telling you that because in order to show that all the elements of the TRIAD affect the economic of regions and the country as a whole. And today, of course, the national projects are a great help to us. And the rural region uses most of the programs that are available for us. Because we used to have to suffer from lack of finance. And important aspect of the regional policy is more detailed consideration of all the aspects. We are talking about the increasing of birth rate. I'm glad that over the latest 24 years, the number of families with a lot of children, more than 3 and more children, has increased by 23%. For us, for most of Russia, for the part of mentality is that the number of children is determined by economic factors. In the Northern Caucasus or Buryatia, it might be different, but for us, a lot depends on material encouragement of births. And now mothers who have 3 and more children ask me, where my child is going to study. This year we have introduced kindergartens, new kindergartens. We have put into practice 7,000 kindergartens with 7,000 places, and more will be built. But now we have to decide the problem of education. It's a further stage, and then the employment. The Oryol Oblast is not perhaps the best region in regards to the average wages. We are one among the last. and thanks to the May decrees and other national projects are aimed at creating good conditions for economic growth. And an important issue is the policy regarding the older generation. We have discussed very actively the increase of the pension age and other problems. And now, I would like to mention in this connection, we are not using the public health system efficiently to increase the ability to work among older people. And I think that for the regions, it would be very useful to look into the issues related to the development of the sanatorium and balneological care of the elder people and treatment, which will make them more able to work. Thank you very much. The third part of the triad, which is connecting the two others, well, if you have good population situation, how are we to get good revenues? It is through the employment. The term cry is an economically well-developed region, but it does mean that it has no problems, because the poor have their own problems and the wealthy have theirs. And I would like now to ask the governor of the Perm Krai, Maxim Reshetnikov, if the government is doing everything correctly to improve the situation, and if something is lacking, which instruments could be added in order to improve the unemployment in the Krai? Is the government doing everything well to improve the employment situation? I could answer in brief. The region is wealthy and the government is doing everything correctly. But in more detail, of course, we are. If we look at the population situation, it is also a triad: birth rate, death rate, and migration. If you look at the federal projects, we see that they regard issues of reducing death rate, increasing birth rate, etc. There are two risks connected with the implementation. I think we underestimate the time which we need to change the situation. We allocate a lot of resources, but it is not just a question of resources. We need also to change the organization of our three-level system of public health regarding cardiovascular disease and cancer, because now objectives are set, and in half a year we are required to report on decreasing the death rate. But it's a bit early, isn't it? And another thing connected with the medicine, which is of concern, is that the state guarantees are being imposed from the federal level. But the units of the federation are all different, and we cannot have one-size-fits-all approach. If we control the process too much, then the regions will say, we have done everything, and the results is not something that we are responsible for. As for the death rate reduction, well, the Perm Krai has a very long history of attempts to stimulate the birth rate by various means. But all such means that we employ affect poverty, because, of course, most families that have a lot of children are poor, but it does not increase birth rate too much. And the third part is migration. At the regional level, it might not be such a big problem. For regions, it can be a very big problem. If we do not do things in order to keep young people in the region, then we will lose those young people despite all the other measures. And one thing which is very important for the young people is education. If we have strong universities, then young people will stay here. If not, then they will go to universities in Moscow, St. Petersburg, etc. Our universities are not too famous, but that's what we have, and we need to do something about them. We need certain mechanisms for their development at the regional level. And as regards the employment, the second part of the triad, as regards the population situation that we have now, even the changing of the parameters of the pension system in the perm cry means that by 2024 we will have about the same number of working age people as in 2014. So the changes in the parameters of the pension system will not increase the unemployment. But we might have problems connected with productivity, connected with digitalizations, the housing sector, etc., etc., etc. So if we do not do anything about the employment, the employment level will be the same, but the wages will not grow faster than the inflation. If we want them to grow faster, then we need to do something about that. And the project on the labor productivity, for some reason, does not affect the less productive sector, the sector of government administration. It's somehow well, you know, the industry is developing well as it is. Of course, the project helps it, but in our case, the case of the perm cry, we have a project on centralized accounting. We have 87,000 doctors and 7,000 accountants which work for the social sector. And digitalization might reduce the number of accountants by four times. Perhaps it won't be as big in our case, but at least 30% will lose their jobs. And so we need to think what these people are going to do. We need to retrain them. We need to provide for opportunities for them. And our housing sector is inefficient. And in order to raise the wage rates up to the minimal wages, we see that we need to do a lot to improve the efficiency of the sector, because it's really extremely inefficient, because otherwise it will cause a lot of problems. So in order to raise the labor productivity, first of all, we need to improve the education, both for young people and for older people. This concept of continual education, which is very important. And the other aspect is the regional, territorial aspect of unemployment or illegal employment. People are closed in their territories, and they things cannot be changed there. We need to take people out in order to bring them closer to job opportunities. For example, 7% of all the housing which is in a desperate condition is in our unfit for living, is in our cry, and so we need to do something about that, and that might also present opportunities. So, by way of summing it up, I would say that we have enough instruments, but there's too little understanding of them, how they are going to be used, at which sectors, how they are going to be absorbed, etc. So we have set ourselves the objective of developing such a program, but so far we have had enough instruments, and we need more.
Well, I think this response is very comfortable for the federal center. You've said it all. Now it's our task to implement. My next question to Alexander. Well, let's move away from the general agenda. We looked at the institutional part of the TRIAD. In other words, how to efficiently spend the increased amounts channeled to social support. Obviously, we take this money from our economy. We reallocate the resources. Now, my question is it possible to effectively combine two stories? First, promoting economic growth, primarily in the private sector, in all sectors of economy. For this, apparently requires reduced taxes and lower tax burden to ensure income growth, which, as Alexei suggests, helps to improve the population situation. How to combine this with the policies aimed to increase the amounts channeled to social support, thus withdrawing more resources from economy, which, among other things, means increasing tax burden, say VAT to 20%. Can we strike a balance here? And if so, where? How to find this efficient mix? Thank you. My understanding is that I'm here as a coordinator of a working group. You've got 7 minutes. Well, I thought I would have less. I was told that we were supposed to finish by 11 a.m. Well, okay. Now, marrying the two approaches. Now, the examples given by Tatiana had to do with the different periods, the beginning of the 90s, the mid-90s, the early 2000s, and we see that sustainable economic growth, in fact, helps address social policy issues, including poverty, population, education, health, and so on. Specifically, we saw that with the growth rates of 5 to 7% per annum prior to the 2008-2009 crisis, we had some opportunities to reallocate resources, not just to address social issues by allotting more funds for that needs. Mind you, prior to the crisis, we allocated significant amounts to address this. We also had some resources to tap in order to support institutional reforms. In fact, any institutional reforms could be implemented in the social sector. We had something to reallocate. We had this safety cushion. Well, unfortunately, we failed to implement all the reforms we had wanted to. I think that we've spent too much on anti-crisis measures, trying to offset the crisis developments. We could have continued institutional reforms. Now, when stagnation started in 2013, and indeed, poverty has been on the rise since then. This also goes to prove that without economic growth, it is impossible to reallocate resources. There is nothing to reallocate. And the social policy impact is weakened. Now, what the businesses are concerned about? Well, clearly, the business community based on this historic example and the current situation, is trying to prove convincingly that the reduction of administrative, fiscal, and other types of burden is a resource that would allow to ensure economic growth and, at the same time, address social policy. For instance, what are our key priorities? It's predictability. You know, when a year ago at this forum, We talked about taxation, economic policy in general. Back then, a somewhat vague formula appeared. It was mentioned that we redesign and rethink our tax policy, and then we will revisit this issue. Okay, fine. We increased VAT to 20%, and we thought that this would settle at this. However, we see that the fiscal burden for the businesses keeps growing. In particular, we hear some people talk about the carbon tax. While this tax is unlikely to be part of the current environmental charges system, this will create additional burden for the hydrocarbon-based economy. Now, this increased fiscal burden persists as a problem. It used to be a problem before 2008, when we wanted to legitimize non-tax payments. It is still very much a problem. Besides, we've not been able to address this non-tax payments and charges. Now, predictability of policy in general is key. As you may know, for over 6 months, the Russian Association of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs, together with the government, is in the process of selecting investment projects that would help implement national priority projects. The business community agreed with the government that the national projects that we should promote should also provide some investment support measures. The Finance Ministry, over the period of 6 months, has come up with 3 draft laws on investment promotion. First, they somewhat adjusted and improved the draft law on special investment contracts. Then a draft law on investment protection and promotion came about. About a week ago, yet another draft law on investment activity in Russia came into being, including investment promotion and protection. Look, we as business community are ready to invest in projects that are aligned with the national priorities. And we said, look, if these draft laws are passed before the end of the year, we will have some guidelines. But unfortunately, this has not been the case. Well, this is one example demonstrating that we still lack this clear picture, this predictability that might allow to improve our investment context and climate, and might even contribute to Russia gaining in the doing business ranking. We are number 31 in this ranking, but we do not see adequate investment or growth rates. There is no positive perception of changes occurring in this country, including due to lack of predictability of economic policy. Now, administrative burden, law enforcement-induced burden, well, these very much persist. When the business community representatives met with the president last year, we again raised this issue. I think, Oleg, you were responsible for this. We looked about this regulatory guillotine. In other words, we wanted to eliminate all the excessive and outdated laws and provisions that existed prior to the introduction of regulatory impact assessment tool. You know, this is still very much on the agenda. I'm talking about the huge number of laws and regulations that date back to the Soviet times and to early 1990s. And this burden, this pressure on business continues to be very high, thus preventing the economy from becoming more legitimate and bringing close to 15 million people to the formal employment sector. And these people, mind you, could serve as a major resource to contribute to social agenda and to addressing other aspects. We're talking about promoting corporate social responsibility. In fact, many businesses are doing this without any pressure. However, social investments if removed from the taxable amount, are not the main reason for the companies to engage in this. The companies and businesses are willing to engage in environmental projects, in improving the working conditions and so on. But this move would have meant that the government is supportive of this move on the part of the business. Now, promoting economic growth per se and promoting social investments done by businesses is a key condition for the incomes to be high, for employment to be productive, and population to improve. Thank you, Alexander. Now, just to sum up, I'd like to invite Mr. Topilin. In fact, he's responsible for this TRIAD because he's our Minister of Social Protection and Labor. I think no other single ministry is trying to address as many issues as his ministry, especially issues and the tasks specified by Decree 204. Please respond. Thank you. Thank you, Oleg. In fact, I think that the goals that our social ministries and my ministry are supposed to address are fairly ambitious. Throughout 2018, we've been trying to find solutions and approaches in order to jumpstart the implementation of the tasks specified by the presidential decree. You know, people tend to speculate whether it is possible or not to reach the targets. For instance, whether it is possible or not to halve poverty. I think this is something we must do. And all the solutions, all the approaches have been mentioned today at this meeting. I think the first thing that should serve as the foundation for us here is as follows. All the activities implemented within this decree, for instance, road construction, should create new jobs, should create income-generating jobs, and hopefully legitimate jobs, as Alexei mentioned. We are to tap our untapped resources. Obviously, poverty reduction is a most important indicator, and this would evolve depending on the actions taken by both federal and regional authorities, something what Mr. Shokin mentioned when we talked about investments and their possible growth. You know, all this, in the end, will impact poverty reduction. Is it possible to halve the poverty rate? Well, I think we should agree. In fact, I think we have agreed already. I think we should agree that we should use comparable measures. However, it does not mean that we should change our poverty measurement approaches. If we're talking about halving poverty, we should use our current methodology. And mind you, this means some 800 million rubles. This is what we're short of. Now, if we spend every single ruble in a very targeted manner, if every single ruble goes to the family that lacks income, we need about 800 million rubles. This is how much we have to spend. But look, this does not suggest that we should just take this money from the federal or regional budgets and eliminate this income gap. Again, this should come as a result of many different actions. It is paramount that this task is embraced and owned by regions. I would not name specific regions. I hope that in the near future we will address this agenda together with them. But there are some regions who have already embraced this And some of the regions even came up with more ambitious targets, while other regions said, well, sorry. In fact, currently the poverty incidence is under 15%, but we can only bring it down to 14%. Well, it's not much of a progress. Currently, we are engaging with regions very closely so that we understand the tasks set by the president, not just for the federal government, but for everybody. And I mean, when everybody puts their back into this, then this will become doable. So I think it is doable. Again, this is not just about the money, it's not about the benefits. It's about training and retraining too. For if we are serious about investing, starting in 2020, we plan to roll out training programs for women who are on maternity leave. Now, based on the pilot mentioned by Tatiana, when in pilot regions we implement such programs to reach out to every single family in order to understand why this particular family is below the poverty line. Well, of course, the income may be low, but the reasons for that may be different. And such reasons may be many. Now, such programs that I refer to will help address this issue too. One other important point that we should be mindful about is disposable cash incomes. In fact, in many regions, there are in-kind benefits. I remember talking to a governor, and he said, okay, we provide in-kind benefits. We provide cattle to our rural population. Well, obviously, this does not affect poverty, statistically. It may appear that people are, in fact, gaining assets. Their incomes appear to grow, but based on statistics, this move would not affect their poverty situation. If such families were given cash in order to buy something, well, this would have affected their poverty status. So again, we should very carefully look at the different approaches pursued by different regions, and this is something we intend to do. Now, the natural increase in population, another major task that we have to address, as Madam Golikova mentioned, we are to reduce mortality, we are to promote birth rates, but I do disagree with those who claim that we should not promote birth rates, we should not encourage birth rates. Well, birth rate promotion and poverty reduction are the two processes that are very closely intertwined and interrelated. We are to use not just the available range of tools. In fact, we have a plethora of tools and financial support measures and benefits provided to families with kids under 18 months old. And then there is a gap. Then we see very small regional benefits that are assessed and provided on a means-tested basis, and only people who are under 18 are eligible to such benefits. Well, somebody mentioned education. I should mention that we must make additional education easy to access. Let us look at how much such additional education for children may cost. If you want to have another program or attend additional courses, and the attendance of such courses should be comfortable for families. I mean, families should not spend additional money to cover travel of the kid to such a program. You know, this is the most important thing that impacts both birth rate and poverty. Now, additional education services, the way I see it, based on my own experience, are fairly expensive. They don't come cheap. This may not be so much about transfers to the population. We might think of some other ways to support people. I have always been of the opinion, and I think that this opinion by now is shared by the vast majority of experts, that of course we can provide additional cash benefits. We can use such benefits to promote growth rates. We can try to use these to improve the aggregate birth rates, but the absolute number of births will unfortunately be going down. The number of births will be going down, and this is something we see in our reality. Now, if you want to achieve natural population increase, we have to bring down the absolute number of deaths, and we have to reduce the number of deaths by 200,000 or 300,000. This is the key component of any of our effort to ensure natural population growth. Together with other ministries, we're looking for additional untapped reserves to employ. And here we can speak about some special programs aimed at maintaining and improving health at companies. This is something that might help us preserve lives. I'm talking about various corporate programs. I'm talking about the various temporary disability benefits. We could think of some tariff measures. Together with Mr. Shakhin, we discussed this issue. We also raised this issue with Madam Golikova. And I think this year we are to find some solutions here. We worked with the Social Insurance Fund, and we did an analysis, and we realized that, let's say there is a sector, there are two companies operating in the same sector. Now, one company, on average, has employees who spend 5 days on sick leave, whereas the other company's labor spends 15 days on sick leaves. Yet both companies pay the same contributions to the Social Insurance Fund. I don't think this is fair. We got to think of how to readjust and redesign the tariff policy and contribution policy so that to motivate employers and employees to stay healthy. In terms of employment, well, I do agree with Maxim Reshetnikov. I think this is where we are to promote and roll out retraining programs. I think this is the only response. And I don't think there is any other response. Now, this year, we're rolling out a training program for pre-retirement age individuals to cover some 75,000 people. Now, every year, our employment services retrain about 30,000 individuals across the country. And here, we cover 75,000 pre-retirement age people. Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have to vacate this room. Well, this wraps up my presentation. Thank you all very much. We will definitely take into account all the nice ideas presented here. Well, thank you. I even had to cut the minister short. Colleagues, thank you very much. I think we benefited from extremely rich discussion. At noon, we're going to have a plenary session here. So with this, we have to leave the room so that it gets ready for the plenary. Thank you.